had documented 6,000 wars across 400 years of service to the historical archive. He had witnessed the elegant blade dances of the brutal siege tactics of the hegemony, and the cold mathematical precision of the war machines. He had every form of violence the galaxy could offer, recorded every type of warrior that evolution had produced, and compiled detailed analyses of combat psychology across 73 sentient species. Nothing surprised him anymore. Nothing could surprise him anymore. He had seen too much. That certainty died on the moon of 4. The briefing room aboard the Coalition carrier hummed with tension as took his position near the back wall. His recording equipment was already active, capturing everything for the archives. The assembled officers represented a dozen species, their varied anatomies creating a strange tapestry of scales and fur and chitinous plates. At the front of the room, a holographic display showed the mining station they had come to reclaim. The station had been overrun by the Hollow 3 standard months ago. The Hollow were a parasitic hive species that consumed organic matter to fuel their expansion across the stars. They were not intelligent in any meaningful sense, but their swarm coordination made them devastatingly effective predators. 2 Coalition assault teams had attempted to retake the station. Both had been annihilated, not defeated, annihilated. 0 survivors, 0 recovered bodies. The Hollow consumed everything. Now the Coalition had requested assistance from their member species. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 12 years ago, a blink of an eye by cosmic standards. They were considered primitive by most measures. Their technology was generations behind the leading civilizations. They were tragically short. Their physical capabilities were unremarkable, yet something about their military reputation had spread through the darker channels of galactic communication. Whispers of battles that should have been losses, stories of human soldiers doing impossible things, had dismissed these stories as exaggeration. Every young species generated myths about their own capabilities. It was a common psychological defense against the vast indifference of the universe. The door to the briefing room opened, and the humans entered. There were 8 of them. Had expected towering warriors, heavily augmented soldiers, something that would justify the whispered legends. Instead, he saw 8 ordinary-looking bipeds in standard combat gear. Their leader was a woman of average height with brown hair pulled back from her face. Her name tag read Kelly, G, and she moved with the casual confidence of someone who had walked into dangerous rooms before and walked out again. Her second in command was a broad-shouldered man called Danny Vance. He had a face that looked like it had been shaped by violence, a nose broken and reset multiple times, scars crossing his jaw and forehead. But his eyes were calm, almost gentle, as he surveyed the room. The other 6 soldiers spread out behind their leaders, noted their names for the record: Park, young and lean with quick nervous energy; Maria Santos, compact and muscular with watchful eyes; Peter, older than the others with touching his temples; Carol, tall and serious-faced; Stephen Grant, broad and quiet; and finally Amy, the youngest of them all, barely out of adolescence by human standards. 8 soldiers, against a hollow swarm that had consumed 2 full assault teams. The Coalition commander, a general named Al, began the briefing. He outlined the station layout, the estimated hollow numbers, the location of the queen that controlled the swarm. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering information he expected to be useless. These humans would die like the others. The briefing was merely a formality. Grace Kelly listened without expression. When Al finished, she asked 3 questions. Where was the most direct route to the Queen's chamber? What was the atmospheric composition inside the station? How long did they have before Coalition forces would write off the mission and bombard the moon from orbit? Al answered, 12 hours until orbital bombardment. The atmosphere was breathable but thin. The most direct route would take them through the station's central processing facility, where the hollow concentration was highest. Grace Kelly nodded once. She looked at her soldiers. Something passed between them, a communication that required no words. Then she turned back to the general. "We'll be ready in 1 hour." The briefing ended. The coalition officers filed out, most of them already mentally composing their reports on the failed human mission. Remained, watching as the human soldiers gathered their equipment. What struck him first was their conversation. They talked as they worked, checking weapons and ammunition and medical supplies. But they did not discuss tactics or contingencies or the probability of their survival. Danny Vance complained about something called a fantasy football league. Maria Santos laughed at a joke Peter made about his ex-wife. Park showed Amy a photograph on his personal device, and she smiled at whatever she saw there. "That's my daughter," said. "She's 3 next month, already talking in full sentences, smart like her mom." "You'll be home for the birthday," Amy said. "Damn right I will." Recorded this exchange with growing confusion. These soldiers were walking toward almost certain death. 2 full assault teams had been destroyed by the enemy they were about to face. 8 soldiers against a hive swarm was not courage. It was mathematics. Bad mathematics. Yet they spoke of ordinary things. Birthday parties and sports leagues and family photographs. They spoke as though tomorrow was guaranteed, as though the universe owed them a future. He had seen this behavior before in soldiers facing death. It was called psychological deflection, a common coping mechanism among mortal species. The mind refused to accept its own ending, so it focused on mundane details instead. Noted this in his observations and prepared to document another failed mission. Grace Kelly approached him as the soldiers completed their preparations. Her eyes were a pale color that reminded him of stone. "You're the historian," she said. It was not a question. "I am of the archive. I am here to document the operation." "Good," she almost smiled. "Make sure you get everything. The folks back home will want to know what happened here." "I will record the events accurately," assured her, "whatever the outcome." Grace Kelly looked at him for a long moment. Something flickered in those stone eyes, something he could not identify. "Whatever the outcome," she repeated. "I like that. Honest. Most people try to wish us luck or tell us to be careful, like luck has anything to do with what we do." "What does it have to do with?" asked. She considered the question. The other soldiers had finished their preparations and were gathering near the shuttle bay doors. Danny Vance made a gesture, and Grace Kelly nodded in acknowledgement. "Will," she said finally. "It has to do with will, the will to keep going when your body wants to stop, the will to stand when everything in you screams to run." She turned toward her soldiers. "Watch carefully, historian, you might see something new today." Watched her walk away, rejoining her unit with easy strides. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the transport that would carry them down to the station. 8 humans filed aboard, still talking quietly among themselves, still treating this mission like any other day. The historian followed them onto the shuttle, his recording equipment capturing everything. The descent toward 4 began. The shuttle touched down in the station's auxiliary landing bay with a metallic groan. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red and shadow, and the air that seeped through the opening hatch carried the sweet rotten smell of hollow infestation. Had smelled that odor before on other worlds, in other stations where the parasites had taken hold. It was the smell of digestion, of organic matter being broken down to feed the swarm. The humans moved out in practiced formation. Grace Kelly took point with Danny Vance close behind her. The others spread into a diamond pattern that covered all angles of approach, followed at a safe distance, his recording equipment capturing everything. The station corridors were dark and wet. Something had ruptured the water recycling systems, and thin streams ran down the walls to pool on the floor. The emergency lights flickered and buzzed, creating pockets of illumination separated by stretches of absolute darkness. In those dark spaces, things moved. Could hear them. The clicking of chitinous legs against metal. The wet sound of mandibles opening and closing. The Hollow were watching, waiting. Park was the first to speak since they had left the shuttle. Contact in 30 seconds, maybe less. How do you know? Asked quietly. The clicking stopped, said. They stop clicking right before they attack, like they're holding their breath. Grace Kelly raised her fist, and the formation halted. 8 weapons came up in perfect synchronization. 8 humans stood in the flickering darkness and waited for death to come to them. It came fast. The Hollow erupted from the ventilation shafts above and the maintenance hatches below. They were nightmarish creatures, 6-legged and armored with black chitin that gleamed wetly in the emergency lights. Their mandibles dripped with digestive enzymes that could dissolve armor in seconds, and their compound eyes reflected nothing but hunger. Had seen Hollow attacks before. He had watched trained coalition soldiers break and run when the swarm descended. Flight was the natural response. Every survival instinct across every species screamed to flee when the Hollow attacked. The swarm was not something you fought. It was something you escaped or died to. The humans did not run. They opened fire in controlled bursts, each soldier covering their assigned sector. The sound was deafening in the enclosed corridor, and hollow bodies began to fall. But for every drone that dropped, 2 more took its place. The swarm was endless, pouring through every opening, filling the corridor with clicking chitin and grasping limbs. A drone broke through the firing line and slammed into Park. Its mandibles caught his shoulder, tearing through his combat suit and into the flesh beneath. Blood sprayed across the corridor wall in a bright red arc. Heard scream, a sound of pure animal pain that echoed off the metal walls. This was the moment. In every battle had documented, this was the moment when formations collapsed. The wounded soldier would fall back. The unit would reorganize around the casualty. Resources would be diverted to evacuation. The swarm would exploit the weakness and overwhelm the defenders. The humans did something different. Danny Vance stepped forward, not back. He placed himself between and the swarm, firing his weapon with one hand while his other reached back to Grip's uninjured arm. He did not pull to safety. He anchored him in place. "Stay with me," Danny said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "We hold here." Park, blood running down his arm and soaking into his suit, raised his weapon with his good hand. His face was white with pain. His breathing came in ragged gasps. But he planted his feet and he fired into the swarm. Grace Kelly's voice cut through the chaos. "Titan formation. Nobody moves." The diamond compressed. The soldiers drew closer together, creating overlapping fields of fire. They did not retreat a single step. They did not abandon their wounded. They stood in the corridor with hollow blood and human blood mixing on the floor, and they fought. Watched Park continue firing despite his injury. The pain must have been extraordinary. Every movement would send fresh agony through torn muscle and damaged nerves. Blood loss would soon begin affecting his cognition, slowing his reactions, blurring his vision. Every combat manual in the galaxy agreed that wounded soldiers should be removed from the front line immediately. They were a liability. They endangered the unit. Park was not a liability. He was a soldier with a daughter turning 3 next month, and he was going to walk out of this station to see her birthday. Nothing in the universe was going to stop him. Not pain, not blood, not the chittering swarm that wanted to consume him. The Hollow seemed confused. Could see it in their movements, the hesitation that crept into their attack patterns. Their hunting instincts were built on millions of years of evolution. They identified the weak. They isolated the wounded. They consumed the vulnerable. But these humans refused to be separated. The injured one did not flee. The others did not abandon him. They moved as a single organism, bleeding together, fighting together. Amy took a glancing blow across her ribs. She grunted, pivoted, and shot the drone that had struck her directly through its compound eye. Blood seeped through her suit, adding to the red already staining the floor. Stephen Grant caught a mandible slash across his forearm. The wound was deep, and could see white bone through the torn flesh. Stephen wrapped his free hand around the injury, squeezed hard enough to slow the bleeding, and kept firing with the weapon balanced against his hip. They were all bleeding now. Every human in that corridor had taken damage. None of them stopped fighting. The first wave broke. Hollow bodies littered the floor, piled 3 deep in places. The survivors of the swarm retreated into the darkness, clicking and chittering in what sounded almost like confusion. The humans held their position, weapons still raised, waiting. Realized he had forgotten to breathe. He drew air into his lungs and tasted copper on his tongue, human blood. The smell was everywhere now. Grace Kelly lowered her weapon slightly, sound off. Vance good to go. Park still standing. Santos minor cuts. Operational. Fine. Grant arms messed up but functional. Ribs might be cracked but I've had worse. All 8 humans were still alive. Counted the hollow dead. 17. 8 wounded humans against a swarm of hollow drones, and they had killed 17 without losing a single soldier. Danny Vance was already moving to Park, pulling out a medical kit. He worked quickly, applying pressure bandages and injecting something that made sigh with relief. Painkillers and coagulants, Danny explained without looking up. Won't heal anything, but it'll keep him fighting. I don't need to be kept fighting, said. His voice was stronger now, steadier. I need to get home for my daughter's birthday. Then we better keep moving, Grace Kelly said. She looked at her soldiers, at their wounds, at the blood that stained their suits and dripped onto the floor. We stay here, more of them come. We push forward, we end this. No one argued. No one suggested retreat or evacuation. The wounded checked their weapons. The uninjured helped their companions reload. And then, without ceremony or hesitation, they continued deeper into the station. Followed them, his recording equipment capturing everything. He had stopped trying to categorize what he was seeing. Nothing in his 400 years of documentation had prepared him for this. These humans were not exceptional warriors. They were not physically superior or technologically advanced. They were bleeding and broken and outnumbered. And they were winning. The historian looked at the blood smeared on the walls, the drops that marked their passage through the corridor. Human blood, red and bright and everywhere. It was not the blood of defeat. It was not the blood of victims. It was the blood of something else entirely, something he did not yet have words to describe. They moved deeper into the darkness, toward the heart of the swarm. The station's central processing facility was a maze of machinery and shadows. Massive ore crushers loomed in the darkness like sleeping giants, their conveyor systems silent and still. The Hollow had been here, could see the evidence of their presence everywhere. Acid burns on the metal surfaces where digestive enzymes had spilled, organic residue clinging to corners and crevices. The shells of consumed creatures scattered across the floor like discarded garbage. The humans moved through this nightmare landscape with weapons raised and eyes scanning every shadow. They had been fighting for 2 hours now. 3 more engagements with hollow swarms since the first corridor battle. Each fight had cost them more blood. Each fight had slowed them down. And yet they continued forward. Watched Maria Santos limp along at the rear of the formation. The slash across her thigh had cut to bone. She had fashioned a tourniquet from her own belt, cinching it tight enough to slow the bleeding but not tight enough to stop it entirely. Every step she took left a small red footprint on the floor. "You need to rest," said quietly. Maria looked at him with eyes that held no self-pity. "I'll rest when we're done. Your wound is severe. The blood loss will eventually cause you to collapse. Then I'll collapse after we kill the queen." She turned away from him, adjusting her grip on her weapon. "Don't worry about me, historian. Worry about the things we're going to kill." Had no response to that. He simply recorded her words and continued following the unit. Danny Vance was in worse condition than Maria. During the second engagement, A hollow drone had caught his hand between its mandibles. 2 fingers had been severed cleanly, the index and middle fingers of his right hand, and the wound had bled heavily before he could apply treatment. The historian had watched Danny cauterize the wound with a plasma torch, burning the flesh closed with his own tool. The smell of cooked meat had filled the corridor. Danny had not screamed. He had simply gritted his teeth, completed the procedure, wrapped the hand in bandaging, and picked up his rifle. He was firing left-handed now, and his accuracy had suffered for it. But he was still fighting, still moving forward, still covering his assigned sector with the determination of someone who refused to acknowledge the concept of defeat. Grace Kelly called a halt at the entrance to a large chamber. Her cracked ribs were audible now, grinding against each other with every breath she took. A hollow claw had caught her across the torso during the 3rd engagement, and the impact had damaged something inside her chest. She breathed in shallow gasps, each inhalation clearly painful. "Queen's chamber is through here," she said. "About 200 meters. The swarm will be concentrated around her. Everything we've faced so far was just the outer guards." Park leaned against a support pillar. His shoulder wound had reopened during the last fight, and fresh blood was seeping through his bandages. "How many we looking at?" "Best estimate from Coalition Intel says thousands, maybe tens of thousands." Peter laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. 8 against tens of thousands. Those are bad odds even for us. "We've had worse," Carol said. She was checking her ammunition, counting what remained. "Remember Station." "We had 12 soldiers at Station," Stephen Grant pointed out. His arm wound had been rebandaged twice, and his face was pale from blood loss. "We're down to 8 here." "8 is enough," Grace Kelly said. There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation. She stated it as simple fact, the way someone might state that water was wet or stars were bright. 8 is more than enough if those 8 refuse to quit. Amy was sitting on the floor, her back against a piece of machinery. Her cracked ribs made breathing difficult, and could see the effort it took for her to remain conscious. She was the youngest of them, barely 20 standard years old. In any other species, she would have been considered a child. Yet she sat there among wounded veterans, bleeding from her own injuries, and she did not ask to stop. "So what's the plan?" she asked. Grace Kelly looked at her soldiers. 8 wounded humans in a room that smelled of blood and machine oil. 8 people who had every reason to turn back and no intention of doing so. "The plan is simple," Grace said. "We go in there and we kill the Queen. Everything else is details." "I like simple plans," Danny said. He flexed his damaged hand, testing what remained of his grip. "Simple plans are the best kind." Stepped forward. He had been silent for most of the journey, recording without interfering. But now he felt compelled to speak. "You cannot win this fight," he said. "The mathematics are clear. 8 wounded soldiers against a concentrated swarm protecting their queen. You will be overwhelmed within minutes." Grace Kelly turned to face him. Her stone eyes held something he could not identify. Amusement perhaps, or something deeper. "Tell me, historian, in all your years of documenting wars, have you ever seen mathematics win a battle?" "I have seen superior numbers prevail consistently against inferior forces." "Superior numbers," Grace smiled, and the expression transformed her face. "That's the thing about numbers. They only matter if everyone agrees to follow the rules. If one side decides the rules don't apply to them, the math stops working." "What rules are you referring to?" "The rules that say wounded soldiers should retreat. The rules that say blood loss leads to defeat. The rules that say 8 cannot defeat thousands." She gestured at her soldiers, at their wounds, at the blood that stained everything. "We don't follow those rules. We never have." Peter had finished checking his equipment. He stood and stretched, his joints popping audibly. "The historian doesn't understand," he said. "Can't blame him. His people have never fought like we do." "Then explain it to him," Grace said. We've got a few minutes before we go in there and make history." Peter looked at with tired eyes that had seen too many battles. "Every species in this galaxy fears death," he said. "They build their entire civilizations around avoiding it. Their tactics are designed to minimize casualties. Their strategies prioritize survival above all else." "This seems rational," said. "It is rational, it's perfectly rational, and it's why they lose." Peter pointed at the blood on his own suit, the red stains that marked him as wounded. "We don't fight to survive, historian. We fight to win. There's a difference." "What difference?" "When you fight to survive, you retreat the moment the cost becomes too high. When you fight to win, there is no cost too high. There is no wound that stops you. There is no amount of blood that makes you quit." Peter's voice was quiet but intense. "We bleed, historian, we bleed a lot, and every drop of that blood is a promise." "A promise of what?" "That we're not done yet, that we're still here, that whatever you throw at us, we'll take it and keep coming." Peter smiled grimly. "Our blood isn't a sign of weakness, it's a warning. It's us telling the universe that we're willing to pay any price, and that should terrify anything that stands against us." Grace Kelly nodded. "Time to move, everyone ready." 8 voices answered in unison, "Ready." They rose, these bleeding warriors, these impossible soldiers. They checked their weapons one final time. They looked at each other, and something passed between them that could not capture with any recording device. Trust, perhaps. Love. The bond of people who had bled together and would bleed together again. Grace Kelly led them toward the Queen's chamber. Followed, his recording equipment capturing everything. The blood trail they left behind them stretched back through the entire station, red drops marking their passage, red smears on every wall they had touched. The humans were leaving a map of their sacrifice, a testament written in their own life force. And still they moved forward. The door to the Queen's chamber loomed before them, massive and dark. Behind it, could hear the swarm, thousands of clicking mandibles, tens of thousands of chitinous legs scraping against metal. The Queen's psychic presence pressed against his mind, ancient and hungry and utterly alien. Grace Kelly paused at the door. She looked back at her soldiers one more time. "Stay together," she said. "Watch each other's backs and remember what we're fighting for." "Birthday parties," Park said. "I'm fighting for birthday parties." Grace almost laughed. Good enough reason as any. She kicked the door open. The swarm screamed. The humans charged. The Queen's chamber was a cathedral of nightmare. Organic matter coated every surface, pulsing with the slow rhythm of the hive's collective heartbeat. The walls breathed. The floor shifted beneath their feet like living tissue. And in the center of this horror, surrounded by a sea of writhing drones, the hollow Queen waited. She was massive. Her body filled the center of the chamber like a bloated god, her chitinous form bristling with sensory appendages and birthing sacs. Her compound eyes numbered in the dozens, each one tracking a different section of the room. Her mandibles could crush metal. Her psychic presence could shatter minds. 2 coalition assault teams had died in this room. 56 soldiers from a dozen species, all of them trained, all of them equipped with the finest weapons the galaxy could produce. They had entered this chamber with hope and left it as food for the swarm. 8 wounded humans charged through the door screaming battle cries in their strange earthborn language. Pressed himself against the wall near the entrance, his recording equipment capturing everything. What he witnessed in the next minutes every principle of warfare he had ever documented. The swarm responded to the intrusion with overwhelming force. Drones poured toward the humans from every direction, a tsunami of chitin and hunger. The mathematics were clear. The humans would be engulfed in seconds. Grace Kelly raised her weapon and fired into the swarm. Wedge formation, pushed toward the Queen. The humans formed a spearhead with Grace at the point. They did not spread out to minimize casualties. They did not seek cover or defensive positions. They compressed together into a single killing unit and drove forward into the heart of the swarm. Danny Vance fought with his damaged hand pressed against his chest, firing his weapon one-handed with devastating accuracy. His bandaging had soaked through completely now, blood dripping from his ruined fingers. He did not seem to notice. Maria Santos limped forward on her wounded leg, each step a small act of defiance against her own body. She had stopped bothering to rebandage her thigh. The blood ran freely down her leg and pooled in her boot. She kept moving. Park had given up on saving ammunition. He fired on full automatic, sweeping his weapon across the swarm in wide arcs. His shoulder wound had opened again, and could see bone through the torn flesh. His face was locked in an expression of absolute determination. The drones fell before them in waves. 10, 20, 50. The floor became slick with hollow blood. The humans waded through bodies, climbing over the fallen to reach the next line of enemies. They were not soldiers anymore. They were a force of nature, unstoppable and utterly without mercy. Carol went down first. A drone caught her from the side, its mandibles closing around her midsection before she could react. Heard her scream, heard the wet sound of chitin puncturing flesh. The drone began to drag her backward, toward the waiting swarm. Stephen Grant did not hesitate. He threw himself at the drone, abandoning his weapon to wrap his arms around Carol's body. His wounded arm left smears of blood across her suit as he pulled against the drone's grip. "Let her go," he snarled. His voice was barely human. The drone's mandibles tightened. Carol screamed again. Stephen released Carol with one hand and drove his combat knife into the drone's compound eye. The blade sank deep. The drone shrieked and released its grip. Stephen pulled Carol free and shoved her toward the rest of the formation. "Keep moving," he ordered. Carol was hurt badly. Could see that. The drone's mandibles had opened wounds across her stomach that bled freely. She should have fallen. She should have been evacuated. Instead, she picked up her weapon with shaking hands and continued forward. The swarm began to adapt. They stopped attacking randomly and started focusing on the wounded. The drones could smell blood. They could identify weakness. Evolution had taught them to target the vulnerable. But the humans refused to be separated. Every time a drone lunged for a wounded soldier, another human stepped into its path. They shielded each other with their bodies. They formed barriers of flesh and determination. The swarm could not isolate them because they would not allow themselves to be isolated. Amy took a claw strike across her face. The wound opened her cheek to the bone, and blood poured down her chin. She wiped it away with her sleeve and kept firing. Peter caught a mandible slash across his back. The cut was deep and saw him stagger. Danny Vance grabbed his arm and kept him upright. "Not yet," Danny said. "Not until we're done." Peter nodded and found his footing. His back was a ruin of torn flesh and exposed muscle. He kept moving. They were 30 meters from the Queen now. The swarm between them and their target was a solid wall of chitin. Thousands of drones, packed so tightly that individual bodies blurred together into a single writhing mass. Grace Kelly's cracked ribs finally gave way. Heard the sound, a wet snap followed by a gasp of agony. Something had punctured inside her chest. Blood bubbled at her lips when she breathed. She did not stop. "Push," she ordered. Her voice was a wet rasp. "Push harder." The humans pushed. They drove into the swarm with everything they had left. Ammunition ran dry and they switched to blades. Blades broke and they fought with fists and boots and teeth. Stephen Grant headbutted a drone to death. Maria Santos strangled one with her bare hands. Park bit through a drone's leg joint to free himself from its grip. 20 meters from the Queen. Danny Vance lost his remaining hand. A drone closed its mandibles around his wrist and severed it cleanly. He looked at the stump for a moment, blood jetting from the wound. Then he picked up a fallen drone's severed claw and used it as a weapon, stabbing and slashing with a grip that was nothing but will. 15 meters. Carol collapsed. Her stomach wounds had finally overwhelmed her. She fell to her knees and then onto her side, her weapon slipping from her fingers. Stephen Grant tried to reach her, but there were too many drones between them. "Go," Carol said. Her voice was faint. "Finish it." The others hesitated for a fraction of a second. Saw the pain in their eyes, the terrible choice they faced: leave their companion or fail the mission. "She's right," Grace said. Blood ran down her chin in steady streams. "Push forward, honor her sacrifice." They pushed forward. Behind them, Carol pulled her sidearm and began firing into the swarm. She killed 11 drones before they overwhelmed her. Recorded her death. She died still fighting. 10 meters from the Queen. Stephen Grant went down next. A drone caught him from behind, its mandibles closing around his neck. He had time for one last act. He pulled a grenade from his belt and triggered it. The explosion killed him and the 17 drones surrounding him. The path to the Queen was clear. Grace Kelly staggered forward. She was dying. Anyone could see that. The punctured lung was filling her chest with blood. Every breath she took was shallower than the last. Her weapon was empty. Her blade was broken. She had nothing left but her body and her will. She pulled a plasma grenade from her belt. The Queen's compound eyes tracked her approach. The massive creature's mandibles opened and closed in what might have been confusion or fear. No prey had ever come this close. No enemy had ever reached this point. Grace Kelly looked back at her surviving soldiers. 5 humans, all of them wounded beyond reason, all of them still standing. "Get clear," she ordered. "Captain," Danny started. "That's an order, Sergeant." Danny Vance hesitated. Then he saluted with his remaining stump and began pulling the others toward the chamber entrance. Grace Kelly turned back to the Queen. She smiled, and her teeth were stained red with her own blood. "This is for Carol," she said, "and Stephen, and everyone else you've taken." She charged. The Queen struck at her with mandibles that could crush metal. The blow caught Grace across the chest and sent her flying. She hit the ground hard, the plasma grenade still clutched in her fist. She should have been dead. The impact should have killed her, but Grace Kelly was not done yet. She crawled forward, leaving a trail of blood behind her. The Queen struck again, opening wounds across her back that exposed her spine. Grace kept crawling. 5 meters, 3 meters, 1 meter. She reached up and pressed the plasma grenade against the Queen's skull. "See you in hell," she whispered. The grenade detonated. The explosion threw against the chamber wall. His recording equipment crackled and sparked but continued functioning. Through the smoke and debris, he saw the Queen's body collapse, her massive form crumpling inward like a deflating balloon. Her psychic presence vanished in an instant, and the effect on the swarm was immediate. The drones stopped moving. Their coordinated attacks dissolved into chaos as the hive mind that controlled them died. Some of them simply froze in place. Others began wandering aimlessly, their programming disrupted beyond recovery. A few turned on each other, unable to distinguish friend from foe without the Queen's guidance. Coalition reinforcements poured through the chamber entrance within minutes. Soldiers in heavy armor swept through the room, eliminating the confused drones with methodical efficiency. Medical teams followed close behind, their equipment ready for casualties that might still be saved. Pushed himself to his feet and surveyed the carnage. The chamber floor was carpeted with hollow dead. Thousands of bodies, perhaps tens of thousands, piled so deep that the original flooring was completely obscured. The air was thick with the smell of blood and burning chitin. And in the center of it all, near the Queen's ruined corpse, Grace Kelly lay motionless. Moved toward her without thinking. His legs carried him through the field of bodies, stepping over drones and around pools of mixed blood. He reached Grace's side just as the medical teams arrived. She was alive. The historian could not understand how. The wound she had sustained should have killed her several times over. Her chest was a ruin of shattered ribs and punctured organs. Her back had been torn open by the queen's mandibles. Blood covered every inch of her body. But she was breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths that gurgled with fluid, but breaths nonetheless. "Get her to the shuttle," a medic ordered. "She needs emergency surgery within the hour or we lose her." They lifted Grace onto a stretcher and began carrying her toward the exit. Her eyes flickered open as they moved, and she saw watching. "Did we get her?" Grace asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "The queen is dead," confirmed. "You killed her." Grace smiled. Blood stained her teeth. "Good." They carried her away. Remained in the chamber as the medical teams worked. He watched them find Park, unconscious but alive, his shoulder wound finally having overcome him after the battle ended. Maria Santos was sitting against a wall, her leg elevated, applying pressure to her thigh with hands that shook from exhaustion. Danny Vance was being treated for his missing hands, both stumps wrapped in emergency bandaging. Amy had passed out from blood loss and was being carried to the shuttle on a stretcher. Peter was walking under his own power, barely. His back wound held together by nothing but medical tape and sheer stubbornness. 6 survivors out of 8. Carol and Stephen Grant had been recovered, their bodies wrapped in emergency blankets and loaded onto a separate shuttle for transport home. 6 survivors. The historian had documented hundreds of battles with similar casualty ratios. 2 dead out of 8 was not unusual. What was unusual was that any of them had survived at all. The mathematics had been clear. 8 wounded soldiers against a concentrated swarm protecting their queen. The outcome should have been total annihilation. Instead, the queen was dead, the swarm was broken, the station was reclaimed. The coalition commander, General Al, approached as the cleanup continued. His face was impossible to read, but his voice carried something that might have been awe. "Your report," he said. "What will you write?" Looked around the chamber, at the blood, at the bodies, at the survivors being carried to safety. "I do not know yet," he admitted. "I have never seen anything like this." "Neither have I," Al paused. The previous assault teams had better equipment, more soldiers, superior tactical support. They died within minutes of engaging the queen. These humans had nothing but basic weapons and wounds that should have killed them. They won. "They won," agreed. "How?" The question hung in the air. Had been asking himself the same thing since the battle began. He found Grace Kelly in the medical shuttle an hour later. She was connected to machines that breathed for her and pumped blood into her veins. Her wounds had been stabilized, but she was still critical. The medics gave her a 50% chance of survival. Her eyes opened when approached. "Historian," she said. Her voice was stronger now, supported by medical intervention. "Still recording." "Always." He sat beside her stretcher. "I have a question, one question, and then I will leave you to rest." "Ask." "How do you do this? How do you bleed so much and keep fighting? How do you face certain death and not retreat?" Grace was silent for a long moment. The machines beeped and hummed around her. Outside the shuttle, could hear the coalition soldiers securing the station. "You want to know our secret?" she said finally. "Yes." She turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were clear despite the pain medication flowing through her system. "We are all going to die someday," she said. "Every human knows this from childhood. We carry death with us every moment of our lives. From the day we are born, we understand that our time is limited. We count the years. We watch our elders age and pass. We bury our parents, our friends, our children sometimes. Death is not a stranger to us. Death walks beside us every single day." She coughed and blood flecked her lips. A medic moved toward her, but she waved them away. "So when death comes to the battlefield," she continued, "we recognize an old friend. We have already made peace with it. We have already accepted that we will die. The only question is whether we die having done something that matters. And that does not frighten you. It terrifies us, Grace smiled weakly. Every human who fights is afraid. Fear is natural, fear is healthy, but we do not let fear decide for us. We feel it and we fight anyway, because there are things more important than survival, people we love, causes we believe in, promises we have made. She reached out and touched a recording device with blood-stained fingers. Death retreats from humans because we have already accepted it, she said. You cannot threaten someone with something they have embraced. You cannot break someone who has already made peace with being broken. Our blood is not a sign of weakness. It is proof of our commitment. Every drop that falls says we were here. We fought here. We did not surrender. Her hand fell back to her side. The machines beeped louder and medics rushed forward. Tell them, Grace whispered. Tell the galaxy what you saw here. Stood and stepped back as the medical team worked. He watched them stabilize her again, fight back the death that was trying to claim her. Grace Kelly was still not done fighting. He left the medical shuttle and returned to the Coalition carrier. In his quarters, surrounded by 400 years of documented warfare, he began composing his report. I witnessed humans bleed in combat today, he wrote. I watched them suffer wounds that would have killed any other species. I saw them lose limbs and continue fighting. I saw them die and their companions fight harder because of it. I saw 8 wounded soldiers defeat an enemy that had destroyed 56 of our best warriors. He paused, considering his next words carefully. And I finally understood why even death retreats from them. Death retreats because humans do not fear it. They have made it their companion. They walk with it every day of their short lives. They have accepted it completely. He continued writing. There is nothing more terrifying than warriors who have already accepted their end and fight anyway. Nothing more unstoppable than soldiers who measure success not in survival but in sacrifice. The humans do not fight to live. They fight to win. And when victory matters more than life itself, mathematics becomes meaningless. The report was distributed across the coalition within a week. It spread through military channels and diplomatic networks and civilian information systems. Species that had never heard of humanity read about the Battle of Four. They read about Grace Kelly and Danny Vance and Park and all the others. They read about blood and sacrifice and victory. Within a year, humanity was no longer the member of the galactic community. They were its most respected. And in the archives of the Historical Division, added a new entry to his 400-year catalog of warfare, a single line that would be quoted for generations. If you see a human bleeding on the battlefield, do not assume they are weakened. Assume they are getting started, and pray to whatever gods you worship that you are not standing in their way. Park made it home for his daughter's birthday. He walked into the party with one arm in a sling and scars that would never fully heal. His daughter ran to him, and he lifted her with his good arm and held her like he would never let go. Grace Kelly survived her wounds. It took 6 months of surgery and rehabilitation, but she returned to active duty. The scars across her chest and back became legends. Soldiers from a dozen species requested transfers to serve under her command. The Hollow never attacked a human-defended position again. And somewhere in the vast archives of galactic history, a simple truth was recorded for all eternity. When humans bleed, they become more dangerous. When humans fall, their companions become unstoppable. When humans die, their cause becomes immortal. Even death knows when to retreat.